Hey, Carl here to say that Music to Code By is now an app called Music to Flow By. Now you can listen to the tracks on your phone with offline capability. The first 3 tracks are free, and the entire catalog is available by subscription with a new track arriving every month. If you purchase the complete collection before October 24th, you can get a big discount. Check your inbox for an email from carl@pwop.com for the code, or just go to musictoflowby.com for all the links. Welcome back to .NET Rocks. This is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
And we just got back from Europe and talking to Shawn Wildermuth. He's going to be here. Should be a hoot.
Boy, are our arms tired.
Yeah, old joke. I take it you had a good flight, uneventful?
Well, we all survived, right? Of course, we were coming back in late September. This comes out in late October.
Yeah.
So was dodging hurricane season. I flew over it because no reason to stop on the East Coast, but you live there.
Yeah, it was just, the guy said it was a little blustery.
Nice.
But we landed fine. You know, I was almost more concerned because they were threatening to route us through North Korea. So that was, I'm glad they didn't do that.
Yeah, a little bit of a long way. You know, that great North Korean hub of, I don't know, Pyongyang. Yeah, all right.
Yeah, all right. That's all I'm going to say about that.
That's all you're going to do with that. Okay.
We're just a little freaked out over here in the United States. Let's just leave it at that.
I can imagine why.
Yeah. Let's get started with Better Know Framework.
Awesome. All right, man. What do you got?
Well, this is something that has been around for a while, but I hadn't seen one, and I thought it was so cool, I'd feature it after I saw it. And one of the speakers in the Speakers Lounge at Dev Intersection, you probably know who it is, but I had never met him before and didn't ask his name, pulled out this thing that looked like a big iPad Pro. However, it was a Sony digital paper notepad.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
So if you go to 1488.pwop.me, you'll see this digital paper notepad. It looks like a Kindle. In other words, like a big Kindle. The screen kind of has that look about it. And that's essentially what it is. It takes no electricity when you're reading it, but you know, when you're writing on it and all that, it does.
So they are doing the electronic ink thing.
Yeah, electronic ink. But the idea is that with the pen, you can just write, and then it turns that into notes, like it does the recognition and turns it into text, and you can print it and make PDFs of it and search it and all of that stuff. So it is for people who like to write, you know, with a pen and don't like all the other stuff, don't need all the other stuff that's involved with computers and keeping them up and tablets and all that. This seems like a really good idea.
Yeah, you know, Sony made one of the very first ebook readers anywhere. I bought one. But, you know, Kindle's kind of ended that market in some respects.
Yeah.
You know, it's more about the supply chain than it is even about the product. So it's cool to see that Sony's gone somewhere that, and it's like 13 inches in diameter. So this is like
it's
the
big.
Size of a piece of paper.
Right. Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, also, you know, Kindle is read-only, and I think you can maybe do a little browsing on it or something, but it's not something that you're going to write on.
Yeah,
so,
take a pen to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very Star Trek, isn't it?
It is kind of. Yeah.
That's cool.
Well, who's talking to us today, Richard Campbell?
Grabbed a comment off of show 1323, the one we did back in July of 2016 with one Shawn Wildermuth. We were talking a lot of ASP.NET Core. Of course, that was in the early days of Core, shortly after it first shipped and was going through many convulsions.
Mm-hmm.
And we had been part of that event as well and had Humanitarian Toolbox, which Shawn helped heavily on. In fact, this comment actually comes from a relation to Humanitarian Toolbox. This is from John Fleener, comments from about a year ago. He says, you guys interview Pluralsight presenters all the time. It would be cool if they would choose an open source project like Humanitarian Toolbox as example code. They could improve the project as well as explain their presentation topics with real world examples. Also, having lots of developers being trained and guided by experts through the project's code base could provide an on-ramp for other contributors to the project they pick. Thanks for years of education and laughter.
Huh, okay.
It's an interesting thought, John, and certainly we'll talk a little to Shawn about it as well. I do know that talking to trainers, especially not necessarily Pluralsight curriculum, but just trainers, they love the idea of using a project like Already to talk about core. The problem is that you have to rewrite the curriculum every time because the project keeps moving.
Right.
So it's hard to really do repeatability around a lot of those things that makes courseware effective. But it is an interesting question. I think it's a big battle for anybody trying to teach to create good examples. And maybe the best thing to do is to use code that's already out there.
Agreed.
So, John, thank you so much for your comment at .NET Rocks mug. It's on its way to you. And if you'd like a .NET Rocks mug, write a comment on the website at .NETRocks.com or via any of our social media, because we publish every show to Facebook and Google+. And if you comment there and we read it on the show, we'll send you a mug. And
follow us on Twitter. He's at Rich Campbell. I'm at Carl Franklin. Send us a tweet. We turn them into PDFs and occasionally release a book.
And then write all over them.
All right, let's bring Shawn Wildermuth back to the show one more time. He's been on many, many times. Officially, Shawn has been tinkering with computers and software since he got a VIC-20 back in the early 80s.
Woot.
And you know, Shawn, I really appreciate that you didn't say, you know, you've been programming for 10 years, because next year you'll have to change that bio. Anyway, as a Microsoft MVP since 2003, he also is involved with Microsoft as an ASP.NET Insider and Client Dev Insider. He's the author of over 20 Pluralsight courses, written 8 books, an international conference speaker, and one of the Wilder minds. Wilder or Wilder minds?
Either.
Okay. The Wilder minds. You can reach him at his blog at wildermuth.com, WILDRMUTH.com. Welcome back, Shawn.
Excited to be here.
You're the exciting one, man. You travel all over the world. Now you've got a podcast going where you're getting people's stories. What the heck have you been up to, man?
Lately, I've been trying to pass a kidney stone.
Oh, rock on. There's some fun. Are we going to see that on video?
You are. I'm hoping to get the whole thing.
200,000 people just winced at the same time. All right, maybe not at the same time, but.
And if you didn't, it's because you don't know how much pain we're talking about.
Ouch.
Yeah. Yeah. So today's show should be very delightful.
Colorful?
Since I'm on Percocet.
Oh, okay.
Happy Shawn is happy.
Happy Shawn. Happy
We may get some great quotes out of this for our blooper reel.
That would be great. Actually, what I've been up to lately is I'm working on a film called the Helloworld film.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Now tell us about your Helloworld podcast from which this came out, right?
It's sort of related. The podcast is both of you guys have been very gracious to be on, and it's about how people got started. So we spend half an hour hearing, sometimes old man stories or ways that, I didn't even know how people got started. So it's a lot of fun, but I can only have people on once, so I wasn't thinking ahead at first.
You only get their background story so many times, right? Like one is about it.
Yeah.
One is about it. Yeah. And we're getting close to wrapping that podcast up. We're ending after 100 episodes.
Nice.
That's cool.
Yeah. So we're at, I think, 92 now. So probably by the end of the year, we'll be done.
Yeah. Okay. So the movie?
Oh, the movie is about software developers. No surprise there. But I'm trying to demystify what software development is for people that aren't in the industry. So
right. Sort
of explain to parents and spouses and children, that we're not just, quote, into computers. That,
right. This is why we spend 3 days at a time locked in our rooms with, Mountain Dew.
And happy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're also going to be discussing some of the problems of diversity in software development.
Oh, that's good.
Which is a topic that's close to my heart.
Yeah, definitely.
And that movie will be out probably late 2019, early 2020.
Wow, that sounds great.
Yeah, 2020. That didn't sound right in my mouth for some reason.
Yeah, it just seems like a long time away, but it's just not, right? We're halfway through 2017,
not.
So, 30 months?
Yeah. It's scary.
Yeah, as soon as you say it that way, then you're scared to death. Like, oh my goodness, how the heck am I going to get all this done?
All right. So we're here to talk about Vue.js, and I think probably a good place to start is to disambiguate what Vue.js does from the other frameworks, the other UI frameworks, like React, and then some of the bigger frameworks like Angular.
So vue.js is, to me, an interesting thing. I've been kind of railing against the behemoths that require all this sort of pre-processing. I long for, back to the sort of Knockout and Angular 1 days where I could actually just write JavaScript and include a library and go about my business.
Yeah.
We've entered this world of Webpack and pre-compilers and just this stack of compilers in order to get to the JavaScript that we have to have in the browser.
Right.
And that's frustrated me because when you're building a monolithic enterprise app, Angular and React, I think both fit into that space really well, right? You're really writing what everyone likes to call these single-page applications, which are, really VB6 applications written in JavaScript, right?
Nice.
Okay.
And just as maintainable.
Well, I mean, what you're saying is they're stateful. They have things that change. They have events that happen. You're not completely redrawing the screen every time.
Correct. And, the communication is maybe a little different in that they're calling web services in the back end, but there's a lot of craft to making this long-lived in the browser application.
Yeah.
Which is a lot different than, traditionally on the web. And so I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to get that experience when I was enhancing the web, when I was writing for the traditional web, not for, the large enterprise data manipulation application.
Sure.
So the contact page on a blog or the registration page on a code camp site. And even using Angular 2 at the time, I guess it's Angular 4 now, there was so much ceremony in getting it to work. It's been kind of interesting because to combat the complexity of these systems, they decided that the solution to this was to add another tool in the tool chain, so everyone now has their own CLI, right?
Yeah.
That's not complicated at all.
No. You can simplify it by, we'll just code gen this giant lump of code. It harkens back to the complaints about the wizard systems in early Visual Studio and certainly in Visual C++ before then, and how people railed against it. And as usual, everything that's bad comes, it's a cycle.
I guess another way to look at that is if you think about modern software, it's all built on so many layers that we don't think about that, if this is just one more layer and removing it, I guess the question is, do you feel the pain of all those layers or not? Right. I mean, one of the things about early VB was you didn't feel the pain of all those layers. It was, they had abstracted so much stuff away that we could actually just get stuff working, and that was good. But maybe, is it just because we know what's going on under the hood that we're so distraught about it, or are you actually feeling the pain?
It's hard to say where Angular is now, and I can't speak as much about React because I haven't done as much of it. Now that we have the Angular CLI, a lot of the pain has gone away because a lot of it was in setting up the project.
Right.
And CLI can really eliminate a lot of that. But there's still some biases in Angular towards these large applications. And so that's when I started looking around and I looked at a bunch of different frameworks to sort of find where's the middle ground here? Where's the I want to drop a library in, I want to do some data binding and validation and some other things like that, and just go about my business for less than, having to wait for 90 seconds for a pre-compilation to happen. I just want to write code.
Before we get there, let's talk about React, because React I don't put in the same silo as Angular, just because it seems more focused on the presentation layer. Isn't that true?
That is true, but I'm talking about sort of React plus Flux and their ecosystem, not just React itself.
I see.
So React is very focused on that. And I say this with some reluctance because I know I'm going to turn some people off by saying this.
Do it.
Yeah, I have a really hard time with JavaScript plus markup and then a magic compilation step to make it inline strings.
Okay.
It turns my stomach a little. And when I first saw it, I talked to some people I trust in sort of that community and was like, am I just being the old guy who doesn't like change?
Right.
And I eventually came around to no, there's some genuine reasons for not liking this process. I think it's more of a question of style and how you like to develop, because certainly React can help you build certain kinds of applications really well. I feel pained trying to combine it all into one JSX file. It makes me uncomfortable. Okay.
And again, there are genuine reasons, you say. What are some of those reasons?
Yeah, the reasons that I found was this notion of sort of maintainability. It also meant that I felt like you were tying together the business logic and the UI together again, which in some ways was a gift to software development when we could do that with things like VB. But I feel like we've moved away from from keeping them so glued together to having some separation between presentation and business logic.
Well, sure.
And React, on the face of it, doesn't encourage that. Doesn't mean you can't do that. Doesn't mean a lot of people aren't doing that. But it certainly doesn't encourage that behavior. And that's what makes me nervous.
I mean, for testability, that's a big deal. But so are you saying you can't do a sort of MVVM architecture with React?
You can. It's just not at least from my experience with it, it is not it's not, you have to go outside of the React box to do it.
I see.
Yeah. And a lot of people are. A lot of people are like, well, if you don't like JSX, you can use React and not have to use the precompiler and not have to have your inline templates. And that's fine. But that means that I'm learning a framework, and then I have to learn how to work around the framework. And, and then, why am I bothering?
Right.
Is kind of my notion there. Vue.js, on the other hand, is more closely. It reminds me more of somewhat the older ecosystems where it was, I can just write this. And what's interesting about the way that Vue.js has sort of been written is it's sort of the anti-Angular in that everything is modular like it is in Angular, but it's all really opt-in, and it's not all written by the Vue.js team.
Okay.
So instead of writing their own validation layer, someone had written this really cool validation. So they just recommended you use theirs. And routing isn't included by default, and going to another library for doing that. And so there is some challenge there. And, well, how do I know which one to use? And Vue.js has been pretty pragmatic about these are the plugins that we suggest.
Right.
These are the ones that, so you can very easily figure out to get those, those sort of behaviors. How do you get those pretty quickly?
And the architecture of Vue, I mean, we haven't really talked about this at all. Is it just presentation only? Is there a way to separate things well?
Well, the core of Vue is this very small library. And Vue was created by some ex-Angular team members who went off and wrote this other thing.
Okay.
And it, for the most part, is focused on doing just the UI layer. What's interesting is they have this secondary sort of scheme in the way they can work called all-in-one Vue files, where they sort of do the React thing of combining it all into one file. But most people that I've talked to don't use that method.
Yeah.
So if you're kind of a React person that likes that mentality, you can use these all-in-one files. If you're sort of an Angular or a Knockout or Backbone person that wants to come into it, they can use the more traditional drop the library and write markup in the HTML to get that binding done. And as you need more sort of behavior. So to sort of describe their philosophy, in the 2.0 version of vue.js, they removed the HTTP stack. And a lot of people were like, what?
Excuse me?
They did what?
And the reason they did this was they were like, we don't know any more than any other great library. If you want to use jQuery to do your HTTP, if you want to use one of these 14 other libraries that are out there that do a great job.
They didn't remove it from the browser. They just don't have it in Vue. Yeah, okay.
Right. They had written their own wrapper around making network calls.
Yeah.
Then they were like, why are we doing this?
Yeah, I agree.
Right.
I agree.
This is not secret sauce.
Plus, everybody has their own code that they like to use. I mean, we have our back end and we have the code that calls the back end, and usually we like to keep things a particular way. Yeah,
and so I feel like it's more of this sort of opt-in. You can actually build large SPA type applications with it. They support TypeScript and they support using Webpack and all of this. But at the bottom of that stack, you can get back to, let's drop a single library in here, create a single component, and go about our day. And the job of doing these enhanced web pages becomes pretty easy, where the amount of overhead, the amount of just setup and getting, an Angular app per page working is huge when all you need is this little, enhancement to a web page or a routed page just to do, maybe a multi-page registration to a website or something.
So you've said Webpack a couple of times, and I'm not sure people know what that is. That's a bundler, right?
Yeah, that's one of the bundlers. Browserify is sort of the other one in that same space.
Yeah.
And both of them, it's interesting because I've always used bundlers, or I've used gulp scripts to sort of bring all my scripts together, and in the past, but Browserify and Webpack try to do something a little bit bigger, and that is they go through and they actually only use the lines of code you're using. So you could imagine to .NET people, to sort of explain it, imagine them going through the .NET framework and pulling out all the code for only the method calls that you actually call,
right,
and then putting them in the assembly.
Yeah,
right?
Stub out everything you're not calling.
Right.
Yeah.
So that can make for smaller files, but it also, and for me, it makes sense when you go to production. Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
But they've entered development, and so now they're doing these tricks where they're running Webpack in development and having to do these sort of watchers so that they can recompile every time you make a change. And I find it frustrating because we're transpiling in many cases from some language like TypeScript to JavaScript, and then from, if you're using JSX or something like that, you're also doing that step of precompilation,
right? And
then you're asking Webpack to do all this tree shaking and bundling for us, and then we can edit our code. And so there's these levels of complexity that we're getting away from us in JavaScript development.
Hey, Shawn, hang on to that thought right there while we take just a few minutes to hear a couple of words from our sponsors. This portion of .NET Rocks is brought to you by our friends at JetBrains. Hey, how often do you profile memory usage in your .NET apps? What if you could automate memory usage checks so that they're executed every time you commit a change? You can actually do that with .memory unit from JetBrains. .memory unit is a free unit testing framework for monitoring .NET memory usage. You write unit tests that check your code for all kinds of memory issues, and then run the tests on your machine or in a continuous integration server like TeamCity or VSTS, just like you do with regular unit tests. You can track how much memory is allocated, check memory for objects of a specific type to prevent memory leaks, or compare several memory snapshots in a unit test to see if memory usage is creeping up. Learn more and download .memory unit from jetbrains.netrocks.com, or just search for a package called .memory unit on the NuGet gallery. And we're back. You're listening to .NET Rocks. Carl Franklin and Richard Campbell here. And we're talking with Shawn Wildermuth about Vue.js and why he likes it so much. And why a lot of people are liking it, I don't know what the latest stats are on framework usage and switching from React to Vue or any of that, but what's your sense of how popular this thing is?
It's still a minority player when it comes to the Reacts and the Angulars of the world. But what's interesting for me is I don't think it is a replacement for Angular or React. I think they both have their places, especially in these large application frameworks. For me, it is the middle place where some people are saying, let's just go vanilla JavaScript because Angular and those are too big. And I want a little help, right? I could certainly, for every new project, write everything in vanilla JS. And I understand where those guys are coming from. But I want a little leg up, being able to do some simple things around data validation and making calls and making components. And I think that's where vue.js really shines. For me, it's the difference between building a JavaScript app and building a website. So when I'm building a website, not necessarily consumer facing, but certainly internet facing, not most of the pages that I write on these are about people consuming content.
Right.
So blog is a good example of this, even though, not everybody writes their own blog, certainly. But this actually, let me tell you a story that it reminds me of, and that is back in the Silverlight days, there was this push by some people, I'm just going to write my whole blog in Silverlight.
Right.
And it never made any sense because 90% of that blog is just pushing content out, as HTML into a browser. And why would you go through all this steps and routing and all this work just to, display some text?
Right.
And that's what I feel like we're getting to with Angulars. Everyone's trying to Angularize everything. If you have this sort of single purpose internet facing product like Twitter, maybe something like that makes sense because you don't have a lot of things going on and you want the interactivity to be high. But lots of the websites we're making, it's only on 3 of the 12 pages that you really need interactivity. And why are we making the other 8 pages be part of some Spot framework?
Right.
It does seem that Angular is so opinionated that if you use it, you're basically building your site a particular way. You just don't have a choice.
That's true to some respect. I don't want to throw them completely under the bus there because you certainly can do that, but there isn't an encouragement in let's build this library of things we can use on different pages and throw it on those. That's what I had hoped Angular 2 would be. And when I tried to do it, I realized I really had to build a whole Angular app for each of these pages that I needed some enhancement to. And that's where the frustration came in.
Right.
It wasn't just in the tool chain, but also, what do you mean I have to let Angular take over each of these pages and then point them at, separate applications that have to be compiled separately in order to get, this sort of composition.
Sure.
And that's what led me to Vue.js because I can sort of take as much or as little of the architecture as I want, which is something that I liked. I was one of the guys back in the day that would use Knockout and Sammy and this sort of bundle of open source projects in order to do my projects, and I liked that because if I decided I didn't like this one little piece, I could replace it with another, and I find that more difficult in the Angular React world. You're sort of buying into the religion, and I have to believe the whole book.
Yeah,
right.
Sure.
Because part of me is just wondering why, if you don't want that high impact framework, you go back to something like Knockout. Hey, I just want some data binding, right? I just wanted to cut down the amount of code I need to write to connect my database to my application.
And that's a fair point. Some people are like, I'm still using Knockout. Should I be moving to Angular? Not if it's doing what you need it to do.
True.
Vue works and allows me to write things more composed than Knockout did. And that's why I like it in deference to it, especially for new projects. Certainly wouldn't rewrite everything in Vue just because you could. But the ability to write these components that are some markup, some logic, and some CSS has merits. And if I choose that I want to go down the component path instead of the sort of knockout path, Vue can do either one of them, and they're perfectly happy being in both camps.
That's interesting. And I also, the implication you've made there too is that it's more comfortable with the, shall we say, the modern way of building web pages than Knockout is, which is a few years old now.
Yeah. I mean, Steve Sanderson is still doing updates and adding some very interesting things to Knockout, but it is a more, 2013 way of building websites. I hate to say 4 years old is old, but in web technologies, it's ancient,
So long ago.
Yeah. Right.
Me and my DHTML are going to go sit in the corner now.
Oh, God.
You should.
Yeah. Please.
And think about what you've done.
I don't know why you're not still writing Java applets.
ActiveX components? Oh, my goodness.
Oh, my.
Exactly.
Hey, Richard.
Yeah, buddy.
Guess what time it is now?
It must be that happy time again.
Yeah, it's time to minify our .js stones as they pass through the urethra of the internet.
Oh, that's terrible.
Brought to you by Webpack. No, I'm kidding. It's actually a time to give away a D-Experience subscription from DevExpress to one lucky member of the .NET Rocks fan club. Become a UI superhero with DevExpress UI controls and libraries, and deliver elegant .NET solutions that address customer needs today, and leverage your existing knowledge to build next-generation touch-enabled solutions for tomorrow. Whether it's an Office-inspired application or a data-centric analytics dashboard, DevExpress Universal ships with everything you'll need to build your best without limits or compromise. And check out their DevExtreme React Grid, built from the ground up to fully support all the cool features that come with React, like the virtual DOM, state controllers like Redux and all that. It supports master detail, sorting, grouping, paging, and editing. You can check it out and test it for free on GitHub. Learn more and download your free 30-day trial of DevExpress Universal at devexpress.com/superhero.
All right, buddy. Who's our winner?
Today's winner is Melinda Schmitz.
Oh, congratulations, Melinda.
Yeah.
Golf clap for you.
Golf clap for Melinda. She just won the D-Experience subscription from DevExpress, a big pile of awesome from our friends over there, just for being a member of the .NET Rocks fan club. And if you don't know what that is, go to .NETRocks.com, click on the big Get Free Stuff button, answer a few questions, and join the fan club. We have thousands of members all over the world. In every show, we like to give away stuff from our sponsors, and every December, we give away a $5,000 technology shopping spree to one lucky member of the .NET Rocks fan club. But you have to sign up to win. And now it's your turn, Shawn. We like to ask our guests, if you had $5,000 to spend on technology today, what would you buy?
Well, because I'm making a film, it would have to be a camera.
I suppose so.
There's an amazing Blackmagic camera for $5,000.
Is there?
Or I could get a used Red camera, which they start at $15K and go up to about $50K. So I don't have the money for those.
Now, did they hold on to their price? Like, because Reds are famous, right? Like,
yeah,
they're kind of a
super
big deal.
hold on to their price. Yeah, it's amazing. So
I'm just wondering if you could even get one down to $5,000, because I'm going on eBay right now.
They actually have a used section on the Red website, and so they certify used, sort of like certified used cars. They do the same with their cameras.
Well, and that's smart of them to keep the bar that high, right? Yeah,
because when you're spending that much, you don't want a camera that doesn't work. I mean, I use DSLRs to shoot the whole movie, so I'm not spending that kind of money. But if I had it, I would certainly do it.
Yeah.
Look at these. These cameras are crazy. 8Ks, the weapon 8K.
Yeah.
Starting at $50,000.
Starting.
Yeah, could have bought yourself a missile, but instead you bought a camera.
And you might need a missile pretty soon.
Holy man.
Oh, well.
The way things are going.
Let's talk a little bit about how you use Vue. I mean, I guess what I kind of like about the some of the more popular frameworks now is that they encourage separation of presentation layer in a view model, for lack of a better word. How do we do that with Vue? Well, what's the binding story and all that?
It's about the same. It uses handlebars, much like Angular does, and they encourage you to either have the markup in the actual web page or in a template file.
Okay.
Again, much like Angular encourages. And it does two-way binding a little differently than Angular and a little differently than Knockout, but it's pretty close to the same idea. You're going to be using attributes to specify read, write, or callbacks from events. And then you're going to be building either a component or just a simple object in JavaScript that is the view model, essentially. It's going to expose data. It's going to have operations. It's going to have calculated fields, etc., and those are going to be bound directly to it. So it's really, for the Silverlight people, it's very much like MVVM. For the rest of us, it's very much like MVC. It's that same where you're going to keep the binding in the markup, and you're going to keep the logic in the code. This all-in-one, these Vue files, these .vue files that they also support, simply have sections like a script section, a CSS section, and a markup section. They aren't all muddled together. It's really just a single file that they then pull these three sections out of and then compile correctly. So the people that like the idea of sort of one file that they can manage and do it all, they have that option as well.
What if I have some components like material design components, or maybe some Kendo UI controls or other things? Am I going to run into any issues there, or is it just what I think it is?
Well, as long as ultimately what it's going to be using is markup, it doesn't care what the actual HTML is.
Sure.
As long as it ends up being that, if those components end up doing, some super weird things, I'm not sure how well they'll work with them. But all the components I've used it with Bootstrap, and I've used it with jQuery UI, and it worked fine with those. And those are the usual models of how that stuff works.
Mm-hmm. Progressive web apps look like a no-brainer?
No brainer at all.
No.
Yeah, it simply just works. Most of the websites I've used Vue on certainly support mobile and desktop versions. If people want to see how I used it, I have a good open source example at Core Code Camp. It's at GitHub, Shawn Wildermuth Core Code Camp, and that's the .NET Core Code Camp that we used for the Atlanta Code Camp. But I switched that to Vue this last year and got rid of the complexity of Angular, and that should be a good example because there's a number of pages that use it. It's a couple of places that use routing.
Okay.
So there's some somewhat complex pages and some fairly simple pages.
So you did a demonstration. You pulled that out of Angular and into Vue. That's kind of a cool demo.
I haven't done it as a demo, which that wouldn't be a bad idea. But I do have, if you go back to the history, you'll see what it looked like at Angular on V1, and then in V2, you'll see it being done in the same way with Vue, with a lot less code.
Cool.
What about performance? I mean, one of the reasons people love React is because it's so fast, and not sure what they're comparing it to, but what is your take on that?
I don't know, because the places I use it aren't performance heavy, right? I've often said that React does everything really fast because Facebook is in the business of writing a web page that happens to have 400 little boxes that need to do the very specific things, right? React is the perfect solution for Facebook. Most of the applications I write, that's not the case.
Right.
And so I've never run into performance ceilings with really any of the other tools because I've never written those kinds of applications. I tend to end up writing websites versus web apps. And because of that, I've never had we have 17 levels of routing and all this messaging going on and the things that really test out the performance of these frameworks. I don't think the philosophy there is to be slow or fast. I think you'll find it for the kinds of pages I'm suggesting, it's going to work faster than the user can type. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so at some point, is it faster than React? I can't imagine it is, just because of the nature of the way it's written. Is it faster than Angular? I don't know either. But I don't think on the kinds of applications where I really suggest you use Vue, the perf is the issue.
Yeah, you're probably right. I'm pulling up a blog post from Evan Yu, the lead developer and creator of vue.js from November 2015. So this is 2 years old. And he compares the performance. And,
oh, nice.
Yeah. He says for any type of in-place data mutations, Vue outperforms React. When replacing the entire state with fresh objects, you'll have to spend extra work converting these new objects to be reactive, but comparable performance.
I just got to think after 2 years, all that data's changed.
You're probably right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's too long, right? These frameworks move so quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and 2 years ago, I think would have been the 1.0 anyway, and they did a pretty major rewrite for 2.0.
Which seems to be the normal pattern, right? People grab onto your product and start really playing with it. It changes. There's a big impact there.
And you learn that your assumptions were wrong. And
yeah, because they always are.
What about Meteor? Have you played with that?
I have not. It was one of the frameworks to look at, and I ran out of time at some point.
We're definitely, that's on our list of people to talk to.
So many frameworks. But not as bad as it used to be. It does seem to have settled down out there to some degree.
Maybe.
It does. Yeah. And, I think the big story for me, because I get asked a lot, what should I be using? What should I be using?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And I wrote a blog post a while back about this, and I said, just pick one. Write it hard until you know what's wrong with it, and either then you know how to work around the problems, or you have enough information to decide maybe I should make a change here or there. But, our business is about trial and error, and that includes picking a framework. All of these frameworks are going to be able to do what you want. Are they going to fit in with your skill set of your team? Is it going to fit into the exact sort of thing you're trying to do? Maybe you're doing less data collection and more sort of trying to send out real-time data. You're going to have to find the one that matches it best, and pretending that there is a best one for all scenarios is silly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think part of that is the diversity of the scenarios. Like you're talking about, Vue to me doesn't strike me as the first framework I want to go to if I want to build a spa. There are more frameworks that are more savvy to that. So there's sort of these blocks of use cases where it's like, yeah, this is probably the direction you want to go in versus this direction you want to go in. In some ways, I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's the message you seem to be sending is like, this is more of a middle of the road.
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't have to pick one right way here.
And for web developers, I think they really have to start thinking about their skill set as being a toolbox. Angular might be the hammer, and Vue.js might be the screwdriver, and React might be the T-square. I don't know. I ran out of tools there at the end of
the pliers? Help me. My metaphor is breaking down.
It is. But you may need to learn a little of all three to figure out which is the right for your project, or as you move from project to project, the thing that makes the most sense might be different.
Well, and one of the points you made early on was this, folks get sort of comfortable with Angular and then just start ramming every page they build down the Angular pipeline, whether it makes sense or not.
Absolutely. And, I think that's the fallacy in all of this. When I used to be more into databases and people would ask me about ORMs, which ORM is the best and which one should I use? I actually had to try to write one before I realized, everything's a compromise. Software, everything's a compromise. And so finding the one that fits best for you, that's the job.
Yeah. What are the compromises you're willing to live with?
Yeah, exactly.
And also that about, right? I've said on more than one occasion, it's like every piece of software has ugliness. The question is, do you know where your ugly is?
Absolutely.
Do you use the Vue router?
I do, but only on the pages that need the router.
Well, tell us about that. I guess that's their standard router, but you can use your own routing, of course.
Yeah, there's a couple of other open source routers, but it's a simple pattern-based router, much like everyone else has. It's become sort of, the simple philosophy, and it works where you're really mapping a pattern, which may include parameters, into a component that can accept those parameters, and then show whatever that markup is. It works really well. I use for validation, I use a library called vue validation. I'm sorry, V validation, VEE, which confused me at first. Validation. All the markup pieces in Vue start with V dash, so that's why they called it V validation.
So they may all be contractors for Microsoft.
Exactly.
Did I say that out loud?
You did.
There's an insider joke for you.
That's right.
Talking baseball.
There you go. Sorry, I completely derailed the conversation, but I do like this idea that you just use it where you need it.
Yeah, and that, there's this ecosystem. I've been using Axiom for the HTTP. Once I started using it, I was like, I'm never going to go back to, these other frameworks are definitely not jQuery for calling AJAX calls. AJAX is still one of my favorite acronyms because it's hasn't been XML in such a long time.
Right.
JavaScript.
No, definitely a better way to go. They do talk about components in Vue, but again, not a prerequisite. If you want to build them, you can use them. Like, it's just that approach to sort of modularizing everything that describes a piece of a page.
Yes, and so the idea here is, let's say I'm doing a contact page. I could do a component for that contact page, or I could just write a simple Vue model to get that job done.
Right.
But then if I have, a wait cursor or even a whole form that I need to put in, like the login form that I need in 17 different places, let's build that as a component, and then I get that reuse. But I'm not forced down that path like I am certainly with Angular 2 of everything ends up being a component. Right. Not that there's a lot of heft to that, but sometimes the ceremony of the composition is more work that I actually have to write.
Well, I kind of like backing into components too, that you build something in a Vue model way and then realize, we're going to reuse this a couple of times, or we want consistency and styling around it. And so going to pass it to someone else, makes sense to package it up as a component.
Yeah. And the difference between them is not a lot.
Right.
It's really how you construct the object, whether you just construct a simple JavaScript object or whether you construct a new component with a magic component name. So even refactoring from the simple to the component isn't that much work.
Yeah, no, it sounds very comfortable. Like we always look for these pendulum swings, and it seems like this one's striking kind of in the middle right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's really what I was looking for when I was searching it out. Was I wanted something that when I didn't want all the ceremony of precompilers, and it may be that in the beginning I can start small and scale up with it. I don't have to start big, which is the way that certainly Angular and to some respects React feel to me, is that there's a commitment to just getting Helloworld working.
Yeah.
Right.
What about mix-ins? These are sort of component-ish, aren't they? What is a mix-in?
So a mix-in is adding behavior to a component. So it's a little bit like a component, but it's not. You're mixing it into elements to add some behavior. So mix-ins can be used for things like logging or error handling, where you have the same sort of behavior in a component, but you're not really defining a UI and logic layer in that traditional sense.
All right. So maybe like an animation or something that you want to reuse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good example. I haven't done a lot with mix-ins, so I may be talking out of the side of my mouth.
It seems to me that that's kind of the logical extension of a component, especially if you want to reuse something.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Microsoft has jumped on board recently to make sure that TypeScript and Vue work really well together. Because it was a little patchy until recently working with TypeScript, because I know there's a lot of TypeScript fans here that want to use it in every case. I'm a little on the fence. When I'm doing simple things, TypeScript doesn't give me a lot because I don't care as much about type safety when there's only 80 lines of code. But for larger applications or moving to that, being able to scale up, like we've talked about, into using something more robust like TypeScript certainly is helpful.
Is there a Flux-like state management thing in Vue?
There is. Again, it's opted in, and I haven't used it.
Okay.
So I can't speak a lot to it, but I know a lot of people coming from the React world have been using it, and it is written by the Vue team itself. So
cool.
It's not just an official plugin; it's actually this idea that sometimes you want the React which is just markup and logic, and then you want the Flux style larger reactive programming that you can opt into that as you want to. But I haven't done anything with it, so I don't want to pretend that I've gone down that road.
Wow, this is pretty cool. It's worth messing around. And I know if you go to vue.js.org, there's just some getting started fiddles that you can do right away. It doesn't seem like there's a barrier to entry here.
No, and the documentation is pretty well written. I didn't get lost too fast.
That's kind of useful. Hey, before we sneak away, I did want to make a call back to the comment there on this idea that maybe you could use something like Already as a sample app in a Pluralsight video. Any thoughts?
Well, it depends on the course, of course. Well, that didn't sound right.
Look at you being alliterative and things. I think we can do some Mr. Ed references now, right? A horse is a horse, of course, of course.
Of course, of course.
Wilbur.
Oh, Wilbur. Oh, sorry. I stepped on your Wilbur.
We Wilbured simultaneously.
Oh, my goodness.
So I like the idea a lot. The courses that I've been teaching lately have been these end-to-end courses.
Right.
And so unless I was going to rewrite Already from scratch in front of people, it doesn't make as much sense for some of my courses. But I could see like doing a Bootstrap 4 course by going to Already and converting all of their stuff from 3 to 4 as as an exercise in how to do the upgrade.
Right.
Things like that.
One of the challenges you've got now is I think there are multiple check-ins to Already every day.
Every day, yeah.
I know how long writing a chunk of curriculum takes. Like with the project perpetually moving under you, it might be really challenging to make it make sense. You kind of have to have control of it if you want to tell a story around it for teaching purposes. And
that is true to some extent. But you could always pin yourself also to a branch.
Yeah.
That at some point Already could decide to come back into or whatever the thing is. So there are ways to certainly manage that level of change.
It's got to be really tough to pick sufficiently complicated to be real, not so complicated to be lost, and feature rich enough that you show everything people need to know around a tech.
Yeah,
that is the challenge. I when I did my ASP.NET Core course, I had this sort of idea of this website that I thought would be a little bit more complex to do it with. And so I had this map that I would draw. And what I ended up doing was spending probably a little too much time getting this map to work for the students instead of actually teaching them things about ASP.NET Core.
Yeah.
And a lot of the questions came to, Google changed their API in the middle of the course being written and other problems. So in the rewrite to that course for ASP.NET Core 2, I decided to make the data model more complex, but the UI less complex to try to sort of combat that. Try to make something a little bit more real, but not, I think I went for the map because it certainly made the demo like, this is where you'll end up look really cool because the giant map and you had drawn, your trip across the country on it and that sort of thing.
Who would do that?
I don't know.
That? That's just crazy talk.
Shawn, is there anything else that we haven't covered that you think is really important before we hang up here?
Well, I would love to plug November 1st, the Kickstarter for the Helloworld film will be coming out, and
Nice.
love to share that with your audience.
Very cool.
You can help me make the film better, and tell if you have a story to tell that you think would be important in the movie. Please let me know. You can see all about the film at helloworldfilm.com.
I got that link.
That's about 6 days from after the show publishes. So
Perfect.
Yeah.
Like that wasn't an accident.
Yeah,
or
really.
anything.
Yeah.
Hey, man, good luck passing that stone.
Thank you. Thank you.
I could say I feel for you, but I'm really trying not to.
Good call.
Yeah.
Good call.
Thank you, Shawn. Always a pleasure.
Awesome.
And we'll see you next time on .NET Rocks. .NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Pwop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time.
Got transmitter banned by the FCC. Yes, I'm a